All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our Tips for Effective Grant Writing webinar. Just as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded so that we can make it available to folks who are not able to attend today. If you have any questions as today's presentation unfolds, feel free to go ahead and submit them via chat as you think of them. We'll pause several times during the presentation to answer the questions that we have received to that point. If you think of any questions after the webinar, please feel free to reach out to us at that doacommunications@wisconsin.gov, and we'll do our best to answer them. So as you've seen from the information, today we are pleased to welcome Maria Redmond, our Director of the Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy. Maria has previously secured over $85 million in grants for various organizations, and today she'll be sharing her insight and expertise with us and explaining generally how grant application processes can work and provide some tips on how you can submit successful proposals. So with that, Maria, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you all for joining today. I am going to walk through a very high level of a grant application and some of the steps and thought processes that will be helpful for you. I'm going to do this in sections. So the first section is going to be the pre-proposal section. And actually, let me just really talking about preparation, and then writing a proposal, and then looking at the response and what happens with the response. And then I'm going to jump into some resources that are available to you now. Now, it's just a snapshot of resources. It's not like a comprehensive list, because obviously that would take hours and hours to try to get through. But when I get through each section, I'm going to pause, because I think it's really helpful to answer any questions you have right away, as we get through each section. So I'll pause, and please, store up your questions, and then we'll kind of go through. We have an hour and a half, so I feel like we have plenty of time to get through everything with the pauses and things like that. So I hope to have a little interaction with you. Feel free to turn on your cameras if you want to share your faces. It's helpful to see faces too. But I'm just going to jump right in to the presentation. And a lot of the information is just based on experience of writing grants and having success in grant writing throughout the years. And so really what we want you to do is be prepared. And this is a majority of the work related to grant proposals. So really you're taking an idea, you're preparing, and you're getting to a proposal and getting that to a point where the idea is well thought out, and you can be able to put that into a proposal to a funder and talk to them a bit about why it's important that you get the funding for your organization. So it's really important for you to do the homework, figure out the feasibility of the concept that you're interested in, making sure that you understand all the needs required to write a proposal, making sure that you have staff available, that you have support for the idea, that you really vet out that idea before you even put a proposal together. And part of it is also tying it to your organization's capabilities. You don't want to propose anything that's outside of the capability of your organization. And usually with grants, it's filling in a need or a solution to a potential problem that the funding that you would get would help you be able to solve a particular problem, either within your organization or within your community that you serve. So overall tips as well, you're going to be, as part of a grant proposal, you're going to be addressing the needs of the funding agency. They have certain missions and goals themselves, and so you're going to want to make sure to address their needs. Also, the proposals that you write are going to complement your own organization, business, governmental strategies and planning. And so the ideas that you come up with should further strengthen your goals, your long-term and short-term goals, and help you to reach those targets. And then you want to make sure that you have that support within your organization, because it's really hard to be the only one working on a proposal. I don't know of anyone who just and I'm sure there are folks out there who have just written a grant by themselves and gotten it, likely because of lack of capacity within their organization. But usually there is some support from the leadership or from the organization to help you with that idea and tie it to your annual plans, your strategic processes, and filling in the needs and gaps of the organization. So to start off, you really need to know your organization, the history of your organization. Why did your organization start? If it's a business, what service do you provide? Who are your customers? For local governments, what type of services are you providing for your community? If you're a community organization, what services do you provide and what support do you give to your organization? Know why your organization began and the history of your organization, because that really sets up how long has your organization been in place and working. Are you relatively new or have you been around for a very long time? And how has it evolved throughout the years? And what changes have you seen? Is it societal? Is it economic? What has really driven the changes within your organization? And then you want to know what's the current status? What's your current mission? Do you have a mission? If you don't have a mission, it's really important to set up that mission. A lot of grant funders want to know what the mission of the organization is and what you aim to do. Your vision, what's your ultimate target? A vision is mission and vision are definitely different. The way that I look at a vision is it's that sort of unattainable goal, but that's what you're striving for. To address and solve world hunger. Everything that you do is working towards solving that. While world hunger will probably always exist, everything that you do within your organization aims to address that and to resolve that issue. Values, what's the values of your organization? We just wrote the clean energy plan, and the values within the plan are justice, equity, and collective action. Justice, making sure that there's meaningful involvement in decision-making processes. Equity, making sure that everyone can feel the effects, the benefits of a clean energy transition. And collective action, that governmental bodies, all industries, non-governmental organizations, residents within the state of Wisconsin are a part of the transition. And so those are our values. So you want to also know what the values are, and having an understanding of what all those are and having them stored somewhere for you to easily grab is super helpful. And then the function and methodology of your, how does your organization work? Well, how do you start a project within your organization? Who approves? What's the processes? How do you bring in dollars and how does that get distributed within your organization? So it's really important to understand how your organization works and what are the mission, vision, and values that move your organization along throughout time. As another part of this is who's in leadership. What do you have? A board, parent organization? Sometimes some boards require a board resolution for you to move forward with any sort of application process. Who makes the decisions? Who is going to support the work that you're doing? Who can be held accountable? Who's going to be the person or the group that's held accountable? Who are you going to have to report to? So having knowledge of all of this is going to be very important on the front end. Who's in charge of taking on a project, making sure that you have specific personnel engaged right away. Who's going to be the key contact? Who's going to be writing? Who's going to be editing? Making sure that you have the expertise and credentials within your organization and have the time to do it. Because this is another part of it, is making sure that you have the time to not only write a grant application, but also if you're awarded, that you have the time to manage that application. Thinking about your overall budget. Most grant providers or funders are going to want to know your organizational budget. A lot of them require you to submit financial statements, and that's usually, it is usually your financial office or somebody who can put those together for you to be able to submit. But if you're a smaller organization, you're a smaller nonprofit, or you just started a nonprofit, that's something to think about, to make sure that you have your financials in order so that you can show the financial stability of your organization. And also you make the case for needing more funding, depending on what you're seeking. And annual reports are a really good way to get some of this information. If your organization, company produces an annual report, a lot of the statistics that you need for a grant application can be easily extracted out of that report and put into an application. So you don't have to recreate the wheel. So those are some overall tips, and also getting to know your organization and what it's all about. Now you're thinking about the idea. What is the idea? We want to bring in some funding to expand a particular program or to start a new program. So all proposals come from an original idea. And the most successful concepts have been thought about for a very long time, discussed with others, and carefully thought out well before the grant proposal even begins. And so I'm highly encouraging you to try to be proactive versus reactive. If you have an idea and you think, potentially down the line you want to get funding, start thinking about all the pieces now in this pre-proposal phase, because what it's going to do is it's going to set you up for, it's going to be a lot easier when you're writing if you have a lot of this in place. And the other part of this too is clearly identifying your local needs and local issues, understanding your community and who you serve, and understanding the breakdown of the problem you're trying to solve and solutions that need to be addressed, and how the funding will help you address those problems and create a solution. So thinking through the idea and exploring it and having the time, having strategic planning sessions around these ideas, and really breaking down the concept to make sure that you're addressing, you'll have the opportunity to address this through your grant proposal. Again, exploring the idea, identify gaps. It could be services, information, funding, education, outreach. Really gather the information. And a lot of times anecdotal information or anecdotal statements aren't really going to cut it. They're nice, they're helpful, but a lot of what funders are looking for are the data and the information, surveys, official records, things like that. Now, it's also important to tell the story. So that anecdotal information is important, but it has to be coupled with the other information as well, and the data and some of the pieces that show what an impact a grant will have on a community or your organization or business. So funders are also not likely to fund an entire project if it's a high cost project. So really what a good exercise is to break down the project into pieces. And again, doing that ahead of time during your planning process will really help. So here, I work in the energy area, so I have a sample of what something would look like. So when it's an elementary school who has a big clean energy project that they want to work on, an energy project that is, if you put everything together, it's going to cost $1 million, and they're looking for funding to help support. So the likelihood of them going to a funder and saying, "Hey, we need $1 million for this energy project," they might not get that full amount. So as they think through the project, okay, let's break it down. We have solar. We want to put in a solar array on top of our roof. That's going to cost us $400,000. We have an electric school bus. We want to purchase an electric school bus. That's going to cost us $150,000. Project 3, lighting upgrades. We want to go through and upgrade our lighting to have the most efficient lighting within our school district, our elementary school. So that will cost us $100,000. And then we want to put in a new energy efficient HVAC system, and that's going to cost us $350,000. So what you've done is you've broken down the budget to be able to have these different categories. So when a funder announces, say it's a solar for good, or it's a federal incentive or something like that, you have these projects and the budget's already broken down, to be able to respond and say this small project is part of a bigger project that will help us reach our goals. So and funders like that, they like to see, like, how does this tie to everything that you're working on, and how does it benefit the district or the groups that you're working with. And as you're further developing the concept, you also want to define specific goals, SMART goals. I'm sure you've heard of this before. SMART, specific, achievable, measurable. I did it out of order, sorry. Specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. So you have your idea, you have it broken down, and you want to set up specific goals related to each of those projects. So for example, you want to address internal issues such as capital improvements, infrastructure development, staff growth, and program extension. Those are things that are within your internal organization that will help you to get these projects done. External issues such as population served, behavior modified, or community changes accomplished. So that if you bring in funding, one of the goals is that you're going to help your community deploy or be more educated on solar, or be more educated on whatever it may be, that whatever service, like lead lines, things like that. Just making sure when you set up these goals that they're attainable. Again, it's not what your vision says you're going to solve the hunger issue in Wisconsin. It's your mission to work towards that, right? So the goal would address your mission, that we are going to work within our community to establish, a food distribution site, because we don't have fresh, it doesn't have fresh produce, and we're going to work with local CSAs, and we're going to fill in that gap to make sure that our community has fresh food, and that we're addressing that hunger issue within our community. So something like that, which is attainable, and it's achievable. So as you're further developing the concept, you thought of goals, you also need to think of outcomes. So generally, when you're starting to define outcomes, it's increase, expand, improve. How do you define success? It can be quantitative versus qualitative. So it could be quantitative, like the number of people, increase the number of people served within your community. That's going to be different than qualitative. Qualitative will be more community members have knowledge of a certain topic, but you don't necessarily keep track of that metric. Changes in behavior or conditions that reflect a positive impact. So you see more community members, say for example, you get funding for putting in rain barrels in communities, and people see their neighbor have a rain barrel, and the neighbors are requesting, hey, what is that about, and can I get one? And so you're seeing more changes and understanding of the impact of that. Also, changes in behavior, like you're educating people in the community about why it's important to have energy efficiency and turn your lights off, and you're seeing more people change their behavior because they understand why it's important to turn your lights off, and you're seeing the amount of energy go down in a community because of that. And then the emissions change, there are lower emissions as part of that as well. And is there data available? That would be another thing. As we're moving forward with certain goals within, say, our clean energy plan, we found that there just wasn't enough data available. So we didn't set up a specific goal as part of our plan because the data wasn't there. So you just have to also be aware if data is available. And then maybe, the grant that you're applying for can help you fill in that gap of there's no data available. So we need this funding so that we can do more analysis and data gathering to make sure that we get this. And then the outcomes should directly be attributable to your idea. There are probably some secondary and tertiary benefits of a grant and getting the funding and improving services, but it really should, when you talk about your concept and your grant, you should really make sure that your goals and your outcomes are directly attributable to that idea and that grant. And then ultimately, you're going to hit your targets, right? You want to make sure that you achieve those outcomes and that fulfillment of purpose towards the long-term impact and the long-term goal. Sorry about that. So another step in the process is developing a budget. So you have an idea, and I mentioned like breaking down the budget into pieces. Again, if it's a solar project and you know the project is going to cost you $400,000 and you have $200,000, you want to raise the other $200,000. What are the gaps and needs needed? Like, where is it? Is it the development piece? Is it the engineering piece? Understanding where those gaps and needs are needed. Again, your idea should coincide with the need, and the cost should align with the tasks and the needs. So again, you want to develop a realistic cost project budget, and this can be broken down in various ways, like the people, the benefits that you provide to those people, travel, construction equipment, contractual, the different supplies and services. There's always an other category because there's generally things in there that are other. And then the indirect, when you're applying for federal grants, especially, there is indirect funding, and this is things that are, usually it's like a 10% of the budget. Other state agencies and local governments, I believe, and universities, for example, have their own indirect rates. This covers kind of overhead costs for your organization and could cover like, legal consulting, space needs, things like that, that aren't directly attributable to the work related to the grant, but you need like access to legal and space in order to get the work done. So the indirect costs are sometimes included. A lot of foundations don't allow for indirect costs. So you would just have to look at the parameters of the request from the funder to be able to understand what they're looking for in the budget. A really good planning tool, and it is really a thought process exercise, but this is a really important aspect of putting together your idea and working through and having all the pieces. I've actually had funders ask for a logic model to be put into applications. The last 2 applications I put in, they wanted a logic model to show that you've been thinking through all of the different steps. So overall, I'm not gonna walk through a logic model with you because we just don't have time for that. I'd be happy to sit down with anyone who's interested and go through this a little bit more, but really high level. This is a way to organize your work, the work and the intended results of a project. And you can do this even if you're not applying for funding. It's a really good exercise to do. So ultimately what you have here are you have your inputs for your project, the activities that you're going to do, your tasks for the project, what are the results, the outputs of those tasks, and then what impact outcomes does it have, and what impact does it have over time. So inputs are really resources. So human resources, financial resources, physical resources. It could be anything that would support your grant. So this could be available, other available grant funding, cash, in-kind matching funds, any volunteer time that you would be getting, facilities, equipment, community partners. So it's really the resources that you have to be able to kick off the project and be able to do the project. That's your capacity to be able to accomplish, and the personnel. Then you have your strategies, your activities. What your project does with the inputs and resources to get to your goal. So these are your tasks. What are the different things and activities that you're doing to work on the project? The outputs are the concrete, quantified indicators of productivity. So what are you actually getting from all this work, from your resources and your tasks? What are the things that you're getting? Delivering what you proposed to do. So if you said you were going to deliver a report on the number of community solar farms and our community solar locations in the state, and how, like, who's running it and how they're being maintained and operated, what land they're on, things like that. This would be an example of an output. Your report is the output. What's the outcome? So the short, intermediate, and long-term benchmarks of your target population. So this is after you've done all your program activities, what are the outcomes? The number of people served, the sharing of information. Like, for example, if you put that report together, what are you doing with that report? Who are you sharing it with? How is it used? How does it impact people? Then the impact. What are the impacts? The fundamental change that has been anticipated as a result of your project. So, is it more informed people? Is it more people? Like, if it's the food distribution example, more people served and less people hungry. What are those short-term and long-term impacts? So it's really important to go through this exercise. It's a really thoughtful exercise and methodical, I can't say the word, sorry, exercise, but it's so important to take these steps because it really maps out the project for you. And when we get into the writing section, you'll see where a lot of these pieces will fall into a proposal. And again, it'll make it a lot easier for you to put together a proposal. And then another tool that would be super helpful is putting together a grant preparation checklist and having a storage area that any team could access to get these pieces of information. Who would be the main, who are your contacts? Does anybody have to sign any, if you know your structure and the function and methodologies and logistics within your organization, is there always an approval process? So you should have contact information of all those people that would need to be engaged in the process, so that when the time comes for you to apply for a grant, everybody knows their role, and the grant can get routed expeditiously and reviewed expeditiously. Obviously, your address and your website are helpful. Putting together a project-specific concept paper is always helpful. It can be 1 to 2 pages, just really summarizing your project, providing some description, putting in your logic model, your project period, like how long, is this a 6-month project? Is it a 2-year project? Making sure you have sort of your timeline in there, and just having a placeholder for that, because some of those things will change along the way, but depending on the funder. Key staff list with credentials and resumes. A lot of funders ask for resumes or CVs. So having those ready, so you don't have to ask, or you just have to ask if it's updated, or tell people, hey, go to the file and make sure your CV is updated so that we can put it into the application. A number of foundation funders will ask for a list of the board members. So having that list available, detailed budget with line items, financial statements, annual reports, bylaws, Your tax ID is going to be generally all funders ask for your tax ID. Your status. So if you're a 501c3, a lot of funders ask for your tax exemption letter. So having that in a folder ready, scanned and ready is important. Images. This is something that I make sure to keep handy. I've had funders ask for images because if you're awarded, sometimes they want to, highlight the people who are awarded, and so sometimes they'll ask for images. Or if you want to include images or graphs or anything within a proposal, having those most up-to-date images and graphs in a folder is really helpful to have. Letter of commitment templates, or a letter of support templates, drafting out if you want people to buy a letter of support or commitment for, say there's match dollars needed for a grant, having those letters ready to send out right away to folks. I know it helps a lot with me when someone asks for support from my office. If they already have a letter drafted, it's easier for me to put it on letterhead, kind of adjust it and get it right back. It helps shorten the time needed to get those letters back. And then any sort of board resolutions or approval documents that internally you need. Sometimes funders will ask for those to have the board or your organization set up a resolution or any sort of commitment formally as an organization to say this is something we're going to do. All right, so I'm going to pause there and see if there are any on this pre-proposal phase of getting organized.
Maria, I sent you one question that we received via email. I can read it really quickly.
Yeah.
It basically about a free clinic that provides access to multiple medical services that are critical for the uninsured and low-income folks. Decades established clinic, if it developed a robust medical clinic calendar, it requires funding to support medication, salaries of medical personnel. The heart of the question is, they essentially require funding for their medical operations to continue, but many grantors are looking for project-focused organizations. So how do they pivot the organization to meet those grantor guidelines?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm just reading the question again to make sure I got it. So I think what they are, a lot of times it is project focused. So I think what would be important is to understand, this is like understanding the impact of not having these services within your organization, that you have, again, like funders are looking for a specific aspect and looking to fill in a gap. And so what you have to do is you have to say, if we don't have this service or this aspect of our programming, this doesn't happen and this impacts our community detrimentally. And so you have to shift the narrative to be to really express that need within your organization, and kind of fit it into the funder's request of, like, if they're looking at as a project, you kind of have to shift it into project language and kind of changing it around to that type of language that they're looking for. It's I mean, like, if there are a couple of examples of funders that you've looked at, I'd be happy to look and kind of give you some suggestions specific to that funder. It's kind of hard on a really high level to kind of get into those details on something specific like that, but funders are pretty specific in what they're looking for. So if there's a way to, kind of change the narrative to fit what they're looking for, that's where, we would want to help. Or, we could look at the language and figure out, what could you parse it out into sort of what looks like a project, but it still fits the needs of your organization.
Anybody else have any questions? You can also feel free, if you want to, just unmute yourself and use your camera, and you can ask it verbally as well.
Yeah. Don't be afraid. Any question is a good one in this world. All right, well, I can keep going. We have a quiet crew here, but keep your thoughts, and if something pops up later, I don't think I'm filling up the whole time, but I talk a lot, so but at the end, hopefully we'll have a little bit more time for questions. So if something comes up, feel free to either throw it in the chat or we can talk about it. So I'm going to jump into writing the proposal. So now you've gotten really prepared, you've got all your stuff in order, you have a lot of details, and now you're just waiting for the funder to make an announcement, and you want to actually start writing a proposal. So the grant request is initiated by a funder. It could be foundation, it could be state, local government, could be a nonprofit organization, a business. Sometimes business has foundation type grants, and there's other non-governmental organizations as well. So there's a lot of different funding opportunities out there, and so they'll have their specific way that they want you to submit an application. And I snagged an image of all the different types of files because sometimes you are going to have to, submit in different file formats or whatever they need. Usually there's a specific set of criteria unique to each funder. And if you've been diligent in that pre-writing phase, much of the background work that you've done will help you in this phase, because what you have to do is just fit what they're looking, what your information is into their specific grant request. So what I would say is, no matter how much you like your own system and your own format, follow theirs, because that's what they're looking for. And sometimes grantors are very specific about what they want, and they'll reject an application if they don't get it in the format that they want. Some are a little bit more flexible, but just kind of stick to their format for safety. So the sample proposal contents, this is just a sample of what could be asked for. An introduction, and this could include the history of your organization, why you work on certain, why your organization provides the services it does, the purpose of the proposed project, like getting into the specific project and specific ask, the statement of need, overall project description, the goals and objectives, how are you going to get this project done, your methodology, your steps, your tasks, activities. Is your organization capable of doing this? So have you had history of working on something like this before? Have you done grants before? How are you with project management? This is where they'll likely ask for your personnel that will be involved in their experience, and maybe ask for them to attach their resumes. Your budget will be requested, documentation, supports of commitment, and any other forms. All funders are different, so they ask for different forms. And so again, having your pre-work ready, you'll be able to respond to what they're asking for pretty efficiently. Pay attention to the details. The first thing I always say is look and determine if you're eligible to start. Because if you're not an eligible entity, you're going to be wasting your time applying for something that you're not even eligible for. If you have any questions about eligibility, most funders have contacts that you can, or an FAQ where you can submit questions on eligibility or any aspect of the application. So just make sure you're eligible. And if you're not eligible, that doesn't count you out. There are ways to apply for grant in partnership. And if the funder allows for sub-granting, then then you could potentially partner with someone who has the capacity and ability to apply, and then be a subgrant. And so that's where building out the team for a grant or a particular project, being prepared also sets you up for success as it relates to this, because you may realize that you're not an eligible entity, but someone on your team, as you were working through your planning process, is, and maybe external entity is eligible to apply, and that you can work together and makes it a feasible project. Format, number of pages, paper size, character length. Some vendors are very specific on that. Spelling, grammar, math. Like if you have someone who's really good at attention to details, give them your proposal. I know from experience in writing big documents that once you start looking at it over and over and over, you miss a lot. So make sure that you have someone who can look at those details, who might not be necessarily fully engaged in the process. A pair of fresh eyes are always helpful. Understandability. Don't try to impress the funding agency with extensive vocabulary, making it to the point where it's unreadable. Like make sure that you aren't using jargon, or make sure that you're defining words that people might not, like things that you use words that you use internally that the funder might not know. Acronyms spell out the acronyms. You can, if it's a short acronym, you could spell it out every time, or you could, like I say, like focus on energy is short, but a lot of people refer to it as focus. So you spell it out at the beginning, use the acronym or use the shorter version, or if it's a full acronym, it's a long version, make sure that you spell it out right away. But just assume that the person reading it doesn't have knowledge and technical knowledge, but maybe just being really clear on what you're talking about, and not, you're trying to impress them, but don't overly try to impress them. Like get to the point, and don't use any extensive vocabulary. I've seen it before, where you get so distracted by the big words, where you could have just said it very simply, and I would have said yes anyway. So complete list, making sure making sure you go over the package repeatedly, review the package, and make sure that all the requested components are present. Usually before you submit, you have to upload everything, go through your checklist, and the checklist for the grant, and make sure that everything is there so that you're not missing anything. So review and submittal. So understand beforehand how the funder wants you to have it submitted. So a lot of times I put in physically mailed. A lot of times that's not done anymore. I don't think I know any funders who do that anymore. Everything is online systems. And so foundations have their own system. Federal government has grants.gov, which takes a few days to get registered in. Some of the federal agencies also have their own systems. So you want to be familiar with the system. So as soon as you hear about a grant, you want to make sure you go to read through the grant and see how they want it submitted, and if it's in a particular system, to get registered for that system. Even if you're not going to apply, if you just get registered, you'll just keep your login and password memorized, and you at least know that you're registered for that system. And then also pay attention to your different file formats and how to upload those. You want to make sure your proposal is attractive and organized, but also isn't overly complicated. So just give them what they ask for. If they want a cover page, great. If they don't, it's not necessary. But make sure that it looks nice, and it's not a bunch of different fonts and all over just fairly disorganized. They like to see. It's a reflection of your organization, so making sure that it looks good is important too. Again, that checklist, review, make sure everything is there. Don't be late with your submittal. Create a timeline that gives you some space. even a couple days to get your proposal pulled together and get it reviewed. You never, a lot of times unforeseen circumstances can make everything not like futile, right? Your computer system goes down or something happens. Like that's the worst case scenario. But just giving you that buffer time to be able to make sure that you can get it in early and feel relieved. And if something does come up, you have a little window of space to be able to correct anything. But again, follow the funder's rules for submission, and then make sure you receive a response from the funder that the application has been received on their end. That is very important. Usually there's automatic responses. If you don't get that, reach out and let them know that you submitted something but you didn't get a response. You just want to make sure that they got it, so that they got it in time, and yours can be counted towards the review and for funding. So the response, once you submit it, the response comes back, and after a month or two or however long the review process is, you got a grant. Great. So now comes the work. You're going to have a period of budget negotiation, contract development. There could be site visits from the organization. You're going to need to make sure you have your accounting procedures in place, your reporting timelines in place, and then establishment of a reporting system. Make sure you're tracking and measuring your project to make sure that it's successful. And a negative response could come back, and that's okay. You don't give up. You have all your pieces in place. What I recommend is requesting a debrief from the funder if they offer that, to see how you could improve. I've had a couple of debriefs where it was a great application, but there were so many responses that a lot of the ones that were awarded had just got better scores than we did. And there were a couple of things that we could have done to help boost our score. So it was really helpful to have that conversation. These are competitive opportunities, so you never know if it's going to be only a few applications coming in. The more application reduces your chances. So you just want to make sure that your proposal stands out. But sometimes there's just nothing you can do about it. But don't ever give up. Reevaluate your process, and when it's time to apply again, or if there's another funder, apply again. Don't think all is lost. And either way, continue writing another one. There's so many funding opportunities out there, and especially with infrastructure law funding coming and lots of foundations, there's just really a lot of opportunity to get funding. It's just a matter of tracking it down, getting, speaking to that organization and expressing your need. I think that's what I have for that section. So I think a couple of questions popped in.
We got one question. Is it possible to apply for grants without having the business yet? I.e., someone who has a business plan for something but needs money to start it.
I think so. Yeah, it depends on what you're applying for. A lot of times they're going to want you to have some experience, but there are some funding opportunities out there. Especially there are funding to build capacity within your organization. If you don't have a business plan, I know there's a couple of, I think it's Wisconsin Economic Development Corp has some funding for business development, things like that. So it just depends on the funder and what they're hoping to fund. So you just have to kind of dig around, and individuals apply for grants too. If the funder says an eligible entity is an individual, you can apply for that grant. So it also depends on eligibility.
Anybody else have questions? You can feel free, like I said, to unmute yourself or turn your camera on if you'd like.
Oh, the sub-grant partnership. Could you explain the sub-grant more? Yeah, so I've seen this with federal grants. So, for example, the congestion mitigation air quality grant, only certain entities are eligible to apply, local government entities. And so, but they do allow for sub-granting. So if you're, say, within a community that's an eligible entity, they could potentially sub-grant with you, and the local government applies for the grant, but they give the funding to you and you are the one who does the project. And usually those types of entities are like, businesses, or in this case, it would be, trying to think of like a, transit company or something like that, that would not be an eligible entity, but could be, if the funder allows for subgranting, would be able to partner and be able to, the local government who's eligible would pass you that funding for a subgrant. I applied for a $15 million transportation grant a few years ago, actually during a lot of years ago, actually, in around like 2009, and all of the money was subgranted. We were an eligible entity. Local governments were eligible entities too, but because of the amount of money and the organization needed around it, it was easier for the state to apply and then distribute that funding out to the different organizations and subgrant. So we did that, and we had a very successful program, and it worked out really well. So that's kind of how the subgrant partnership would work. Does that help, David? Hopefully. Okay, good. Okay, how are we doing on time here? I have like 30 minutes or so. Any other questions? Okay, I will jump into the local, state, and federal resources. So there are a lot of resources for grants, and sometimes it gets a little overwhelming. It's helpful if you have someone within your organization that can do the research. I would highly encourage it to have someone help with the if you have a project, to have someone be able to do the outreach locally, or to go online and do some of the research, because there's so much available and so much information available, and I think sometimes it gets a little overwhelming. Someone who can come in and kind of organize that for you would be really helpful. Just really high level funders. Funders are mission driven. They have their own missions that they need to fulfill. And so a lot of the funding that will come out will be directly attributable to their mission. There's different levels of accountability and requirements for each funder. Foundations tend to be a little bit more relaxed than, say, federal funding or state funding on their reporting and their timelines and things like that. Just a reminder, with every grant, there's going to be responsibility on the front end and the back end if you're putting a grant proposal together, or if you're awarded. And so just make sure don't take on more than you can handle. There might be a lot of grant applications that you see that you're eligible for, but remember, if you're awarded each grant application and you have $2 million worth of grants, but there's 10 different funders you have to report to, that creates a lot of work. So just keep that in mind when you're applying for grants as well, that you have the capacity and the capability and the feasibility to take on that work. Stay organized. I can't emphasize that too much, because you want to be able to respond quickly and effectively. So staying organized. If you have new projects, or if a project gets funded and is updated and you realize that the project itself has changed, you still need funding for it, but now it's taken a different direction, make sure you're updating your logic model and some of your project descriptions, so that those pieces evolve with your programming. And then also be aware of registration times for different funders' websites and online systems. Sometimes it's a day, it's minutes, and sometimes it's like 10 days before you can fully get registered. So keep those things in mind, because sometimes these opportunities will come up and you're like, oh, I have 3 weeks to pull this application together. It'll just happen really quick. But you realize that, you're not registered in their system. It's going to take 10 days, and, you never know what's going to happen. You don't want to take the risk to write a whole proposal when you can't submit it because you're not registered or there's some hiccup in the system. Local resources. So just a really high level, Marquette University has a foundation funding guide. It is really comprehensive. It's available online. You can search by topic area. There is a fee for that. I think it's around $150 to $258. I'm not sure exactly how much. I haven't looked at it in a while. But this is a really great comprehensive tool. They've updated it. I do believe it's updated through 2021, but I've used it before, and it lists out all of the different foundations in Wisconsin and what they fund, how much they fund, just general information. So it's really helpful. UW-Madison Memorial Library Grants Information Collection. If you go to this website, it gives you a lot of grant writing tips, some tools for grant writing, but also I'm not sure if it's online. Last I heard, you actually have to physically go into the Memorial Library and look at their grant collection. They do keep it updated, so that's another opportunity. But their website has actually a lot of resources that are really useful and helpful in your grant writing journey. Yes. Okay. And then state resources. I just grabbed a sampling of different state resources for businesses and local governments. The Main Street Bounce Back program is currently open and provides grants for recovery related to COVID and for business development. The community development grant is also available. There's a global business development program to help businesses get into global sales and things like that. And there's also a rural workforce and economic development grant. This particular site lists out a ton of different resources that the Office of Rural Prosperity has put together that can help rural communities. So there's just a couple of examples in Wisconsin. The Energy Innovation Grant Program offered at the Public Service Commission of Wisconsin is another example of grants available to a lot of different organizations, including businesses, industry, local government, schools, non-governmental organizations for energy related projects. And they have had a few rounds. I do believe they're going to have another round kind of coming up here soon, and you would follow the Public Service Commission website or contact the Office of Energy Innovation for that one, or go to the website that will have some information. Many of the grants, there are a ton of grants available from many agencies in Wisconsin. I couldn't list them all out. There's unfortunately not like one website that has all of the funding opportunities listed. We did keep track of those for a very long time and shared that information with folks. And I would love to see something for Wisconsin grants that are available, a database that you could look at. So that's something we'll certainly explore. But if you go to any of the agency websites and search grants, a lot of opportunities will come. And that's why it's important to have somebody that you have available, or if you have the time to be able to do some of that research at the different agencies. And additional state resources, Wisconsin Small Business Development Center has a number of resources, a few grants for developing business plans, helping startups. Center for Technology Commercialization has a few grants as well for business, entrepreneurial efforts, things like that. And then just to keep in mind that agencies receive federal formula funding and competitive funding, and infrastructure law funding will be coming. So the agencies too will be having more announcements about different funding that will be available. So getting signed up for, like Department of Administration has email that they send out press releases and information to. So do the other agencies. So sign up for updates for each of the agencies that is applicable to the work that you're doing, so you can get updates from them. Bipartisan infrastructure law, a lot of you have probably heard about that. It's $1 trillion, 550 billion of new federal spending. So a lot of programming will be coming out of that. There's focus on clean energy, roads and bridges, infrastructure, transportation, power and water systems. Also, the bill addresses climate change and addresses the impacts and works to change the impacts of the surface transportation system. So there is a guide related to that. I meant to include that in here. I apologize. In the copy of the presentation that's sent out, I will throw in the guide that was published by the White House that shows all of the different programming related to the infrastructure bill. So you can see all the different funding that will be coming out and who, if it's formula going directly to the states or if it's going to be a competitive opportunity. That way you can see what's coming out there. Federal agencies, so to keep track of what's happening at federal agencies, you can register in grants.gov. You can develop a registration just to search grants, or you can develop a registration for your organization to be able to apply for grants, and that'll create a workspace for you to be able to submit grants in the system. And so that generally takes 7 to 10 days. So keep that in mind. If you're interested in federal funding, now would be the time to sign up and have your registration ready. And some of the agencies allow you to apply through the system, so that having that workspace ready and understanding how that workspace works. There's a lot of tutorials on how the federal grant application process works within the system. Now would be the time to work on that. And Google and Bing and all the search engines are great tools. You see that there's a number of resources out there on tips beyond what I'm sharing here today that get deeper into applying for grants. There's consultants available. I know there's a list of organizations that the League of Wisconsin Municipalities has been keeping track of that provide grant services. So I provided that link here, and I know they're keeping that updated as much as possible. The last update they had was March of this year. So just keep that in mind, that there are other subscription services and consultants, and generally at a cost. So that, if you have the budget to be able to do that, definitely go that route. Or, a lot of the stuff can be done internally as well if you have the staff to be able to do that. Or if you're working on this as well, that this is something that you could do without cost, because there's so much information available. So with that, I am done with my presentation. I'm happy to stop sharing and jump into any questions that folks may have. Or Eric, if you want to help me with any of the other questions that popped in.
Yeah, we did get one when you'd mentioned about funding opportunities or applications being submitted electronically. Are there usually other submission options for agencies that do not have very good internet access in northern Wisconsin?
That's a really good question. So that would be dependent on the funder. So what I would say is we would want to contact that entity and see if they have alternate submission options. And foundations probably would be a little bit more flexible with that. With the federal funding, usually I would have to look. I've seen somewhere you can still mail in applications, but you have to, in your timeline, you would have to make sure that you build in the time to make sure that that application reaches the funder by the due date. So again, you just need to adjust your timeline, but it would really be dependent on the parameters that are set in the funding announcement that is made. So. And if you don't have great internet in northern Wisconsin, we have to connect you with Public Service Commission and get you a broadband grant so that we can get you better internet. Any
Any other questions? Again, you don't have to submit it via chat. You can just unmute and or turn your camera on if you'd like to do it verbally. Going once.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Will the recording be posted and available as well?
Yes, it will be. And just to follow up, because I know several of you have asked for copies of the presentation and things like that, and we can get that out to you. I think Maria will go ahead, and the one we send out, I think you'd mentioned including a link to the guide to the new infrastructure bill.
Yeah.
So we'll just tweak the presentation that you've seen so that the one you received does have that information in it. But yes, we'll send out the presentation, and then I think probably a link to the Zoom recording should be available. We'll also be kind of posting access to the video version of this, like on our YouTube channel, things like that. It's just might take a few days for us to kind of get that video rendered and uploaded to everything like that. But the Zoom recording should be available fairly quickly, I think.
The YouTube version would be wonderful. Thank you.
No problem.
Hi, I have a question.
Yep.
So I'm wondering, would this presentation ever be given in a different language, like Spanish?
Yeah, I think we could explore that. I would be happy to. I don't speak Spanish, but I certainly could see if we could do that.
Thank you.
And then also we could investigate whether if at least the captions could be translated. Any other questions? Going once,
Yeah, you're making it easy on me. Thank you.
going twice. All right. Well, as I mentioned earlier, if you do think of any questions, please go ahead and reach out to us via email at that doacommunications@wisconsin.gov account. Meanwhile, we'll work on getting the presentation to you, the updated presentation to you, and some of the information. And then I think we'll also put that up on the WDB business office page, webpage that I think they have available. And as a reminder, our series of webinars continues next week. On June 29th at 4 p.m., we'll be hosting a webinar about the Wisconsin Supplier Diversity Program. If you're unfamiliar with the program, it certifies minority-owned and service-disabled veteran-owned businesses to help provide them a better opportunity to do business with the state of Wisconsin. So the 29th webinar will cover the process of how your business gets certified, what are the benefits of getting certified as a diverse supplier in Wisconsin. So if you're interested, that's open to anybody. You can find the link to that webinar on the program website, which is, as it says in the graphic, supplierdiversity.wi.gov. And Ray, that's all I had, unless you had any other final thoughts.
No, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you joining me and your interest in grant writing, and hopefully what you found was helpful. And yeah, just stay in touch with us if there are things that you need as you're moving forward in your grant writing journey.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for participating. We hope it was helpful. And we'll be following up with you in those other communications. So thank you, everybody, and have a great day.